governing asylum in the EU. My name is Davide Colombi. I'm a research assistant at SEPS in the Justice and Home Affairs unit. And today I'll be the moderator for this session. We will be looking at the EU Pact on Migration and Asylum, and specifically whether the Pact adequately addresses issues related to the containment of asylum seekers, uneven responsibilities between member states, and whether the Pact complies with EU values, fundamental rights, and international legal standards. We will look at these issues with a fantastic panel of speakers and equally great discussants. So first of all, I'm honored to introduce Minister Dimitris Karidis, Minister of Migration and Asylum of Greece. Welcome, Minister. We then have MEP Tineke Strik from the Greens. Welcome. Tamas Molnar from the Justice, Digital and Migration Unit at the EU Fundamental Rights Agency based in Vienna. Welcome, Tamas. And then we have Jean-Louis de Bruer, Director of the Egmont Institute in Brussels. Welcome. I'm also pleased to welcome our four discussants. Stefan Mayer from the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Welcome back to ASILE. Charlotte Slente, Secretary General of the Danish Refugee Council. Welcome. Christina Sarra, General Director of MSF Greece. And finally, our in-house expert, Senior Research Fellow and Head of the Justice and Home Affairs Unit at SEPS. So before giving the floor to the speakers, I need to remind you that this session falls within the scope of the ASILE Horizon project, which is coming to an end after 4 years of work and for which we have a final conference tomorrow. And also, as for the rules of engagement for today, I'll give the floor to each and every speaker for about 5 to 7 minutes for their introductory remarks. You will see a sign in the audience showing that you only have 1 minute left, so that, you know, we have a lot of speakers today, so you need to stick to the time if you can. And then after the introductory remarks from the speakers, I will give the floor to the discussants that will be able to react to what was said before or also present their work. And finally, I will give the floor back to the speakers to react to the reactions again. If time allows it, we are going to open up the floor to Q&A from the questions from the public. We might run over by 10 to 15 minutes because we have a lot of speakers and we would like to have an engaging and meaningful conversation. So yeah, this session is recorded for internal use only for the ASILE project, but Charamas rules apply. Yeah, without further ado, I'm now giving the floor to the speakers, starting with Minister Karidis. So, Minister, how does the Pact help authorities and ensure responsibilities, that responsibilities are shared between member states? And do you think it actually solves the unresolved issues that we've seen in the past years? Please.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be with you this morning. Obviously, the Pact is a good step in the right direction, but it cannot provide the full answer and the final solution to the problem of managing irregular migration and providing a common asylum and migration policy for all of Europe. Greece is one of the countries that wants more Europe and more European responsibility on a European level in managing these problems. We have managed some progress, but obviously we have more to go. Now, I'm very happy to be with you this morning because I was here many, many years ago in 2008. We organized a conference on Greek economy. We know what followed. In those days, SEPS was a bastion of orthodox economics, let me put it mildly, with my dear friend Daniel Gross. And now I accepted the invitation very happily, but in the spirit of being provocative, I would say that after diving into the questions and the topics, I have to alert you, in case you need alerting, that the way the topics are and the questions are being framed are from politically neutral. To put it mildly. Now, it is very legitimate and very good for a think tank to try to influence the public discourse. It's a different thing, and I need to alert you there for the risk to live in a bubble away from the consensus of the European electorate. And I say this both because I'm an elected politician and because I come from a front line state where the issues and the priorities might be different. And because as a liberal pro-European politician, I feel I have a great responsibility in saving the middle-of-the-road approach for the extremists of both sides. And as we are moving towards elections, European elections, we have to be very careful not to appear, I'm sure this is not your intention, disconnected from the vast majority of European voters at the end of the day. Now, as I said, Greece is very pro-European, and we struggled with countries such as Hungary, for example, that were vehemently against solidarity, to introduce for the first time this mandatory solidarity mechanism, and this is good. Now, we have to be very sincere when we talk about migration. On the one hand, a balanced and effective approach needs legal pathways to immigration, and the Greek government has just, is the only government in Europe right now that has managed to legislate migration reform to provide documents to undocumented migrants with a vast majority in Greek parliament, with 62 votes out of 300. It's something impossible in most European countries these days, let alone in America. Now, if you think in Europe we have a problem, let me tell you, because I just came back from Washington, that in the United States they have 10 times the number of irregular arrivals compared to Europe. Obviously there, Texas has an interesting policy of shifting, how you put it, shifting the responsibility to New York City and Chicago by busing those arrivals. It is a thing that we cannot do in Greece, busing those coming in Greece to Brussels, for example, in this beautiful city. We have to provide for them, and we do them, save them from the danger in the high seas or in the Greek territorial waters every day. It's a struggle. Yesterday we had more rescues, 100 of them in a boat adrift from Turkey on its way to Italy off the coast of the Peloponnese, and this is a daily situation. Legal pathways. We have to speak about legal migration and how to support and promote it. We had that law in Greece. We are signing bilateral agreements with countries. We are promoting legal pathways, for example, with Egypt, a country that is producing a lot of irregular arrivals right now, to shift the flow from the irregular and the illegal smuggling to the regular and the way the voters want and the economy demands. The second thing, these legal pathways is to my right, okay, me being at the center. So to the politicians and the electorate to my right, I have to convince them about the goods of migration. To my left, however, there is an equal job to be done. And there we have to say that we are in danger, not of shifting responsibility, these are all footnotes, of having the whole system of international protection collapsing. The Western electorates will not tolerate for long a situation where everybody who comes into Europe or America stays, no matter what. It makes a mockery of the asylum process. It is making a mockery of the whole processing that we go through with interviews, with checking the facts, the documents, everything. If at the end of the day, he who gets asylum stays, he who doesn't get asylum stays as well. Because we have constructed such a legal and administrative system where returns are impossible. So this is something that UNHCR accepts, even UNHCR accepts. But there are political forces in Europe who have difficulty admitting to. And I think they are making a disservice to to the international protection system that needs saving, and they are making a disservice to the political dialogue because with their intransigence they are reinforcing the extremists on the very far right. And the two extreme sides of the spectrum are in a sense cooperating with each other even if they don't intend to. But at the end of the day, the result is that those on the far right are being fed and increasing their popularity because of this failure of ours to do returns. We have to protect those in need of protection according to the international law, the Refugee Convention, but we have to be frank, those who have come here for different reasons need to be returned, and we have done an abysmal job in the number of returns. We are very far behind, and time is ticking, and the tolerance of the European voters is not infinite. We have to provide an effective management and show that we can protect, we can have the convention, the famous Geneva Convention. This is a Europe with our European values, and I think this is what the Greek government is trying to do, establish this middle-of-the-road approach as a model in managing migration in a very difficult district area. We do not have the luxury of Brussels or Amsterdam. We are at the crossroads of various migratory routes, the East Mediterranean from Turkey, the Central Mediterranean from Libya now. We have a huge turmoil in the Middle East going on. I don't need to say further. In the Sahel, a very bloody civil war nobody talks about in Sudan, let alone in Ethiopia. We have Ukraine on the north. From all sides of Greece, we have trouble. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Minister, for your input. I'm not going to go into the substance of what you said because we have plenty of discussions. But maybe on SEPs, like I think the framing of the questions reflect our independence and our like impartiality. And it's based, the way we frame the question is based on a research that it looks at the EU values, EU treaties, and compliance with fundamental rights. So that's not partisan. That's, you know, that's the law. So yeah, I would, I think Sergio will also comment on that, but yeah, just to make that point clear. So now we've heard the perspective from a member state, especially Greece, one of the, you know, the most affected member state. We'll now hear from the view from the parliament with MEP Tineke Strik. She's been a vocal critical of the pact. And so we would like to hear your views on the pact and also a reflection on the role of the parliament in the negotiation and the trialogues. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for organizing this and also for your thorough preparation also of this and the views that you often elaborate on. I think rights and value-based policies, this is not something right-wing or left-wing. I think this is part of the EU policies, and I think it's really important that now the pact has been adopted to really have a look at it. Is it in line with the principles of the treaties? And how will it work out in practice? Because a lot of questions are still there to be answered and problems, I think, to be solved. If you ask me what is my appreciation of the pact, I always tend to think of what was the problem analysis actually lying behind the whole idea that we should have a new pact. And I think everyone has another approach on that, another problem analysis, but for me, the two biggest problems were the complete lack of political willingness to perceive hosting and protecting asylum seekers as a common responsibility. And the fact that the other member states did not want to get rid of the first entry criteria is a very clear example of that. And the other thing is a complete lack of compliance with the rules that we have, because we do not operate in a vacuum right now. We have a lot of rules, very detailed level, and there are gross violations ongoing, specifically at our external borders, but also if you think of reception conditions here in Belgium, but also in the Netherlands and many other countries. And there's there's no compliance, but there's also no enforcement. The Commission stays silent on all these violations, looking away. The other member states do the same. And for me, it's very difficult to disentangle those two problems. I really think that because of a lack of solidarity, other countries simply look away from the violations ongoing, because on the one hand, it means less irregular arrivals and less, being pushed back by countries like Greece or others like, then you have them, why should we process them? And then if I look at the pact, I don't see a solution for these two problems. If I look at the AMMR, we had high expectations, but we are still now stuck with the first entry criteria, and the mandatory solidarity has so much expanded that solidarity can mean everything and nothing. I mean, not only even that you can pay off for 20,000 euros an asylum seeker, but if you fund the building of a fence, or if you fund border management in a third country, you have shown, you have done your job as well in contributing to hosting. Contributing to what? I don't know. Contributing, I would say, to preventing asylum seekers from entering the EU territory. So this is no solidarity. On the contrary, the countries of first arrivals even have a longer period that they are responsible for the asylum seekers, going from 12 months to 20 months. And the countries at the external borders get a lot more responsibilities, like doing the screening procedure, doing the border procedures in many occasions. So I think that the already unfair distribution has only exacerbated with this pact. And that led me oftentimes to wonder, why did countries like Greece and Italy actually even, agree on this pact? What's in it for them? And in that sense, I am not confident that in this context there will be more compliance or there will be more enforcement. I think that this practice will continue. Actually, maybe also to sort of compensate for this disbalance in the responsibilities, and it's also in the legislation itself, of course. If you look at the crisis regulation, where there are 3 different situations very broadly defined where countries can invoke such a situation and be exempted from many procedural safeguards. And in that sense, that's also something inherently paradoxical, I would say. The whole pact was meant to have a real common, uniform system, but with this crisis regulation, we will completely undermine it simultaneously. We will see more divergence instead of harmonization. And we see more people for a longer period in border procedures. I'm very concerned myself about the lack of procedural safeguards, the long detention periods, specifically of children and families. And if I look now at the capacities at the external border countries, they are already struggling with sufficient capacity, lawyers, judges, all the things that you need for proper procedures. I'm not sure how that will work out. I have my concerns about that. So still, I'm stuck with the question, why did this, was this adopted? On the one hand, I think that turning a blind eye will continue. This is also, the illustration of that is also that the Council did not want to agree on a monitor mechanism at the border surveillance part, because the Parliament was very keen in having that, at least to ensure, if you have a screening procedure, that everyone will enter into the screening procedure. Now we still don't know. If the pushbacks continue, what is then the added value of a screening procedure in the first place? So this is a big loss of it. And furthermore, if you look at the screening, with the screening on the territory, you will also have, the fueling of arbitrary apprehensions and screening everywhere on the basis of race or ethnic background. And then another thing that I think maybe this is why it was agreed is that you very clearly see in the APR the watering down of the safe third country criteria. So all these things, I think the continuation of pushbacks, the facilitation of migration deals with our neighboring countries, the legalization of current practices with the crisis regulation may be the reason for that this pact has been agreed upon. But I think in the end it's a toxic cocktail because paving the way for shifting out, and I think in this sense it's a good term actually, to shifting out responsibility to outside the EU definitely will go at the cost of the asylum seekers, because we see how these deals work out. There's a lot of money being invested for border control, not on protection. There's no human rights impact assessment before, there's no monitoring. So actually, the only first interest of the EU is keeping migrants out. So in that sense, it's a really missed opportunity.
We have failed in that.
Sorry?
We have failed.
Yes.
In keeping migrants out.
Well, I'm not sure. We can discuss about that if we have failed in that. We have failed in upholding the human rights, I would say. So that's a different.
The migrants out. Both failures.
Yeah. So I will come to an end.
The numbers say so.
Yeah. But well, let me say something about the numbers, because, of course, they are now going up. But I think if you look at the situation worldwide, the numbers of refugees are going up as well. I mean, it's in Ukraine, and if you look in the top 5 of where countries come from, they come from war situations. Most of them are still coming from Syria, Afghanistan, Ukraine. So I think it's important to have a good but fast asylum procedure in place for everyone, so making sure that they have access to an asylum procedure. And one thing that I really agree upon with my colleague here is that, of course, we need to have effective returns. But we can only do that after a proper and effective asylum procedure. And let me tell you one thing. I mean, a lot of eyes are on a recast return directive, but in practice, the return coordinator of the Commission clearly concluded that member states really miss a lot of opportunities to have a good, proper, effective return procedures in place within the current legal framework. So please start working on return procedures. I think that would be, in the end, better for everything, but it cannot be an excuse for this pact, which should be rights and value-based. And please let me make the last remark. There is no such thing like the European voter. I mean, no one can claim that they speak on behalf of the Europeans. Luckily, we have pluralism, we have different opinions, and I think that we should have a proper dialogue, but never claim that one politician can talk on behalf of everyone.
Great. Thank you so much. You've touched upon some fundamental rights related issues, which are now going to explore more in detail with Tamas Molnar from the Fundamental Rights Agency. So please, Tamas, can you tell us a bit more about what you see as the most sensitive issues in the pact, and also possibly also some positive aspects if you have identified any?
Thanks a lot, Davide. First off, good morning, still morning, everyone, and thanks a lot for inviting me. It's my privilege and honor to be in the company of so distinguished and knowledgeable speakers and discussants. I think my contribution will be so far the most boring and more technical one, since I'm going to speak from a legal perspective. I'm a lawyer by background, and of course, as a representative of the EU Fundamental Rights Agency, the level of comments or the engagement is more, at the technical level. So I will start with that. We have now lots of new law. We have 11 instruments, including not just the pact instruments particularly agreed, but the Schengen Borders Code amendments. So several hundreds of pages of new law with increased complexity. Perhaps this is the biggest reform since the inception of this policy field by the Treaty of Amsterdam back in 1999. So it's a lot to digest. And most of them are regulations instead of directives, and we know the difference between different legal instruments under EU law. So regulations are directly applicable with direct effect, but their convoluted wording and large number of exceptions, including derogations in situations of crisis and force majeure, allow significant differences or divergences between member states. So there's a risk of having an Emmentaler cheese, let's say, set of instruments, or the question arises whether we have a bric-a-brac or a true legal system in this specific domain, and whether it's a giant juridical jigsaw puzzle, the contours of which will just emerge after some more thorough analysis. I mean, putting on the fundamental rights lenses, I would like to make 3 points. The first is that, sure, there are several fundamental rights issues and concerns which require particular attention when implementing the pact instruments, and not only the obvious ones, like the increased detention and the containment at the external borders, including the legal fiction of non-entry, but also there are some which have not really received much visibility. And here I just would like to highlight some of those. I wouldn't call them ticking bombs, but those which warrant more attention, like the handling of last-minute asylum claims, including those lodged beyond 7 days following a return decision. I mean, there are safeguards watered down and lowered in this case that of course, EU legislator wanted to address, but many questions are open and can run the risk of effective protection. Then the use of force in case of fingerprinting people in the context of Eurodac, or the risk of function creep linked to the IT systems in the context of screening. I mean, this is a new reality of the more and more digitalization of border control from the very beginning of the screening, and the role of EU large-scale IT systems and how they play out in the context of the screening and every other further steps of migration and asylum management. This is still a terra incognita, and hic sunt dracones. This is an area where the dragons are there, and no one really knows, and there's quite a limited expertise when it comes to the fundamental rights concerns. We're looking at the new emerging legal edifice of migration and asylum management in the EU from the perspective of the large-scale UIT systems. Just look at, for instance, in the Sweden regulation, the rules on identity and security checks, and how these large-scale IT systems and interoperability will play a role in that with less safeguards. Then a similar point is the risk of ethnic profiling in the context of in-country screening. And Tineke mentioned the provision of support services and legal aid in remote areas as a big challenge. So if everything is concentrated in the border zones, how to make sure in reality that all these services are available in remote areas, in the woods, in hard to get there zones. Then another thing, so far we haven't, at least as the agency, heard about discussing on the vaguely defined member states' powers when a large number of migrants attempt to cross the border en masse and using force. Definitely this is the EU legislation translation of the NT and ND requirements from the Strasbourg Court. But this license for member states to act, it's potentially the most dangerous authorization. It's very broad set of measures that it can entail. And the list goes on with conditions to query Eurodac data for law enforcement purposes have been softened. So there are definitely issues. And just to end this thread with the general question, how does the screening regulation, or more broadly, all the pact instruments, allow for bilateral agreements with third countries externalizing processing? Of course, one might say that this is something different. It's using international law instruments in the margin of maneuver that member states keep. But does it go at variance with the principle of sincere cooperation, which is a foundational value and principle of law in the EU legal order? So these are just questions that would require further pondering. Then the second thing, against this backdrop, still there are good things to be acknowledged in the pact instruments, including fundamental rights safeguards and mitigating provisions. And I would like to stress that these safeguards and mitigating provisions shouldn't be forgotten or deprioritized when implementing the pact instruments, but to the contrary, they should be used at their full potential. And the Fundamental Rights Agency has already started looking into those, and we will see soon how we can support that process. And some examples of these, let's say, positive or good things. I mean, it's written in law, in new Schengen Borders Code, that border surveillance is also meant to reduce loss of life of migrants. It's a good starting point. Needs to make sure that it's really not just an empty word, but it's operationalized. Then we also consider that the preliminary health and vulnerability checks during screening is a step forward. I mean, so far there was no unionized, common European level standard in this regard. Now it's supranationalized. Of course, there were some practices at member state level, but now there's binding EU law in a regulation requiring each and every member state to carry out those. Then also now there's a new horizontal fundamental rights safeguard in the Eurodac regulation, and Eurodac also serves child protection purposes expressly for the first time. There's a more explicit language on the protection of stateless persons, framing them as a self-standing vulnerable group under EU law. Another thing in the asylum procedures regulation is the new right to legal counseling in the administrative part of the asylum procedure. So far, it hasn't been there. That was only the right to information. And of course, in general, there's an enhanced role of monitoring and oversight. Just look at the screening regulation and the new APR. And I know that now I'm in the last 60 seconds. The third point is just about the Fundamental Rights Agency enhanced role and new functions under a number of fact instruments. I mean, FRA has been tasked with a number of new tasks. The first is to provide general guidance on fundamental rights monitoring in the context of screening. And we think that the same applies also to the new asylum border procedures, which says that everything which is about monitoring in the screening applies mutatis mutandis to the asylum procedures at the border. So we believe that FRA's role is the same. Then FRA's do's and don'ts on how to use force when fingerprinting has been referenced in the Eurodac regulation. So it's been elevated to the level of EU law that member states should look into that guidance that the agency provided. Then the agency is to collect data to inform the asylum and migration management strategic processes twice a year, and then every 5 years when the new strategy on migration and asylum management will be drawn up. And also FRA has a role under the new crisis and force majeure regulation, since the Commission should consult the agency and gather info from us, including other agencies, to assess whether a given member state is facing a situation of crisis. So all this requires allocating then commensurate financial and human resources to the Fundamental Rights Agency so that we will be able to deliver on these additional tasks mandated by EU law. And before finalizing my input, just one question. How to effectively respond to non-compliance? This is, again, another issue, and linking back to Tineke's points. Of course, we have the good old infringement procedures, but there are other monitoring mechanisms, like the Schengen evaluation mechanism, then the EUAA's new monitoring mechanism. Frontex has vulnerability assessment. There are national monitoring mechanisms to be set up in the context of screening and asylum procedures at the border. So I think overall there's a Ferrari in the garage which needs to be moved out and to be used. And all of these mechanisms should feed into each other. We'll see how synergies will play out in the future. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Thomas, for your contribution and also for sticking to the time. So now we're moving on to Mr. Jean-Louis De Bruer. You've recently written a paper called A Pact, So What, in which you identify some of the issues and challenges for the pact. So we would love to hear what you have to say on the pact, and also from somebody with a lot of years of experience within the Commission.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot again for inviting me here today. I mean, the room is full, so it proves that migration is always a success story, for the worst or for the best, I don't know. And there are a lot of usual suspects in the room also, so you will not be surprised to hear what I'm going to say now. Minister, I remember vividly your speech at the dinner organized during the Vienna Migration Conference by the ICMPD in the autumn. And I really appreciate it, and I appreciate again today your kind of candid and no-nonsense approach of this issue. I would say I would agree to, at least with two of your statements, that one, the pact is not the full answer, and second, that this is an area where we still need more Europe. I will come back on that later in my short intervention. The pact was needed. but maybe not for the reasons that you hinted at. It was needed for political reasons. This was one of the main commitments of the then newly appointed President of the Commission, von der Leyen, that there should be an immigration pact before the end of the legislature. It took some time to prepare it, and I will come back on the reason why it took some time. And then the negotiation of it dragged and dragged and dragged and dragged and dragged, mainly in the Council, I have to say, because the Parliament was keen to regularly show that they were ready, that they were waiting for the Council to start the trilogue. Why did it take so much time? Because the Commission obviously did not want to make the same mistake as the one that they had made 5 years ago, that is to say, to dump on the Member States a solution that they were not willing to accept. I remember vividly what Commissioner Johansson said at the press conference when the pact was presented. We hope that this proposal will not be rejected immediately by the Member States. That was not a very high level of ambition, but at least it was, it triggered the negotiation. One of the weaknesses of I still think that the initial concept that attention should focus on what happens at the border was the right one. But the problem was that the proposal themselves, at the time they were tabled, because they were the outcome of several rounds of consultation of member states, were already very complicated. It was a very complicated structure to understand. And of course, the protracted negotiation within the Council and then with the Parliament did not make it any easier to understand as it stands today. But then, yes, the pact was needed because the closer we were getting to the end of the legislature, the more visible was that kind of hole in the EU agenda. I mean, the EU has fared pretty well during the last 4 years. I mean, it survives the pandemic. It's still united in front of the Russian aggression in Ukraine, and it delivered on its two main priorities, which were the Green Deal and the digital agenda. So, I mean, the performance overall was good, but what was lacking was this pact. The negotiation was dragging, and in all fairness, that's the reason why I appreciate you say that more Europe is needed. At a certain point in time, at the distance where I was as an observer, I was really giving it any hope and thinking, okay, if the member states don't want to do it together, okay, then they take it back. Renationalisation of the migration policy at a certain point in time. But then, of course, the price that would have been to pay is to wave goodbye to Schengen. So that did not happen, or at least it did not happen yet. And there was a negotiation au finish, first in the Council with the famous breakthrough that we would get back to a qualified majority and forget about unanimity, and then in the trilogue with the European Parliament, and we are there with texts which still have to be technically stabilized. I was quite impressed by your presentation, but I would refrain at that stage to make any assessment of the pact as it stands. I mean, it will take 2 years to be implemented, and then we'll see. In all fairness, a bit of an advertisement. We are convening 3 weeks from now, together with our colleagues from the EPC and the Odysseus Network, a morning session on the assessment of the pact. And the one and only topic on which we are going to discuss is it achieving the right balance between solidarity and responsibility, which was the political core of the pact. I mean, is it achieving that? We are not going to venture into the human rights dimension of it. Others do that much better than we do. So that's where, and there the jury is out. The jury is out. We don't know. I mean, member states, at first, the Council is now venturing into the preparation of an EU implementation plan. There will be, afterwards, national implementation plan. It's, for the anecdote, it's very interesting to hear that for very good reasons, both the Spanish presidency and the Belgian presidency were on the brakes when it was to enter about to begin the discussion of the implementation plan, as long as the final dot and comma were not agreed upon. Because, of course, I mean, to reach this agreement, and I've been in this working with myself for a too long time not to understand it. I mean, you need constructive ambiguity at a certain point in time. You need to agree on text which could be interpreted in different ways, and it is because they can be interpreted in different ways that there is agreement for them. But then when it will come up to implement them, when it will come to design implementation plan, then again, as I said it earlier, the jury will be out, and I mean, we're going to have to see on paper, and then I will come, that will be my last comment, at least in all the settings that will be put in place in terms of procedures, in terms of reception facilities, and so on and so forth, if indeed, it is susceptible to deliver. Now, okay, we all know, and Minister, I think that you will agree with that, to put it mildly, trust was and it still is in short supply between member states when it comes to migration. Will the pact be what we need once it is implemented to restore this trust? We don't know. We simply don't know. There are doubts about compliance. There are doubts. I mean, why should member states, and I'm not pointing fingers to any member states, do better now with a much more complicated structure than they did previously with an existing one? Don't know. My last point would be really to plead for caution the closer we are going to get now to the EU election. We must be extremely careful when it comes to political rhetoric about the pact. There were many communication mistakes made around the pact. People saying Dublin is dead. Of course not, Dublin is not dead, it's still there. People presenting the pact that as it was the savior around the corner, as if nothing has been done these last 15 years when it comes to migration and asylum legislation at EU level. No, you said it yourself, Tineke, there is a wealth of legislation already in place, which is not simply implemented. So even if we did not have the pact, there was already a framework into place that could have been properly implemented. So we have to be very careful. And we have to be also very careful because nothing will be felt on the ground during the next 2 years. Nothing will be felt. You said it yourself, Minister, I could not agree more. There are threats all around our neighborhood. If tomorrow, Palestinians are flocking into the Sinai and Egypt, if the day after Lebanese are crossing the strait and ending up in Cyprus, are we ready to deal with that situation at EU level? No, we are not. We are not. We are not. So that still can happen. Indeed, the asylum figures are, and certainly our discussant will want to elaborate on that, the asylum figures will keep on, are skyrocketing for the time being. You are back to the level of 2015, 2016, Stefan. You will correct me if I'm wrong, but we are back there. So it's there, and it's coming, because there is no reason why it should be changing. So we're going to have to those going to the elections, either at European or at national level, like in this country, for instance, will have to be very careful when it is about approaching migration. And then I would tend to agree with what you said, but not for the same reason, Tineke, when you said, mind the European voters. The problem will not be a European problem. It will be 27 national problems, 27 national issues. As I was saying to one of the colleagues in the audience, if there is the slightest migration-related incident in France or in Germany 4 weeks before the election, then, as we say in French, on est parti pour la gloire. So, that's where it is going to be the challenge. And then going to the electorate and say, but that we have a pact in the meanwhile, will not make the trick. Will not make the trick. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. That was great. Yeah. So now we're gonna hear from our discussants. We'll start with Stefan Meyer from UNHCR, please.
Thank you, David, and all colleagues and our speakers. Lots of scope for synergies, for complementaries, lots of the things I've been hearing, and thanks for having given us the opportunity to present in broad strokes our UNHCR perspective. I'll try to reinforce some of the points. Our starting point is to indeed consider that progress on the pact does report a step forward. It does represent a valuable element. It does, however, not, as we have also heard from several of you, not constitute the magic bullet for sure, but hopefully a step towards a response that is more coherent, that is more coordinated, that is more effective, as we have seen previous responses. In many ways, as several of our speakers have been saying, we are only at the very beginning. It's fair to say that we're certainly not at the end of what may be a rather bumpy implementation road. Now, when we say that the pact has potential. It comes with a big if indeed it's implemented with sufficient safeguards. Many of the safeguards that Tamas referred to resonate particularly, but we think it does indeed preserve to an important extent access to territory and asylum in the EU. Protection sensitive implementation indeed of the essence. We continue on the EU to ensure that all the key standards are in place, and that relates to the issue of detention, that relates to the issue potential also when it comes to monitoring, and very importantly, I would like to say what's been mentioned around the issue of non-compliance, a particularly thorny issue when we look at the current key and the way it's been implemented or not. One of the positive features where we are prudently, let's say, confident relates to more functional EU solidarity flowing from the pact. We have specifically welcomed that solidarity is indeed codified for the first time into EU law. We consider that the responsibility sharing measures can indeed help to support asylum seekers, asylum systems of member states where most asylum seekers arrive with relocation. Hopefully at its very heart, we would have preferred a stronger prioritization of relocation in the pact, but we are content to still see it feature prominently alongside other measures. Responsibility sharing for us also includes, and it's part and parcel of the pact arrangements linked to search and rescue, linked to disembarkation. And here I'd like to stress that for us it's of the essence, absolutely crucial that nobody should be criminalized for saving lives at sea. So the entire situation, tragic situation surrounding the Mediterranean is indeed a stark reminder for the need for a search and rescue approach that is principled, that is predictable, that is firmly rooted in international law, and that placing collective efforts, responsibility, sharing and solidarity, the balance of which to be discussed and to be seen also when it comes to the implementation of the pact, hopefully at the heart of the EU's action. We share the concerns that the Tinniger-Strick set out, particularly in connection to crisis regulation here. We consider that there is indeed a very real risk of derogatory norms becoming the new normal. From our perspective, a disproportionate scope for derogations to regular procedures, which may actually defeat, as has been mentioned, the very purpose, the very raison d'etre of more harmonization. And perhaps on this, I could transition to the second question in terms of the external cooperation, maybe to reiterate that for us the pact it does indeed constitute an important bulwark, if I may say, against some detrimental proposals that would aim to further shift responsibility towards third countries, in that the pact, it preserves the access to territory, preserves the access to procedures. We remain firmly opposed to externalization approaches. What are externalization approaches? Approaches that shift responsibility for asylum procedures, that shift responsibility for international protection to third countries. The Global Compact on refugees, the GCR, has been mentioned. There's been an important conference last December in Geneva, and we do think that the EU can play a role, an important role, in addressing the challenges faced by large refugee hosting countries, by transit countries, in a spirit of partnership. So the genuine partnership part of the equation is key. How to arrive at cooperation agreements that are practical, that are protection centered, Well, what could be areas in which states lend more support to third countries? One is potential investments to address root causes. Another one is to reinforce the protection capacities of third countries, but then again preserving access to asylum in the EU. And maybe as a last point, very much concur with the legal pathways referred to by the minister, which indeed for us is also a key part of a suitable reform. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stefan. So now we'll hear from Charlotte Slente from the Danish Refugee Council. Please, Charlotte.
Thank you very much, and thanks for this opportunity. I represent the Danish Refugee Council, which is a displacement mandated council that works across the globe in with displacement-affected communities and people, which means internal displaced refugees, but also host communities around the world. I'm going to concentrate my few remarks on the need for responsibility sharing. And why am I saying that? I'm saying that with a global perspective here, and I think a number of the speakers alluded to it. We are seeing a displacement situation around the globe where we have a very vastly increasing number of displaced people. Now above 110 million people being displaced around the globe. That number has doubled over the last 10 years, and it continues to increase due to the very dire situation that we are seeing in many, many countries, new conflicts emerging and the old conflicts not being finalized. Another feature that I think is very important to highlight here is that 76% of all displaced people, of all refugees actually, are being hosted by low and middle income countries very close to places where conflict takes place. Why am I saying this? These countries will have an expectation that other countries will assist in the task of actually sharing the responsibility for the hosting and the protection of refugees. Their expectation is all actually increasing at this moment in time because the financing gap on humanitarian assistance is also increasing, which makes it more and more difficult for these countries to actually cater for the hosting responsibility, for the protection responsibility of refugees under their responsibility, on these countries' responsibility. So I think we need to understand that we have a global problem at hand that requires global solutions, and Europe has to play its part. This introduction just to say that we are a little bit concerned about the pact, because we are afraid that there could be some responsibility shifting underlying this pact, and we will need to follow very, very closely the implementation of the pact to ensure that does not take place. But we believe that there is a risk because we see a tendency in the pact that this is the situation. So first, what do I mean by that? I mean, we see that there is a risk of devastating implications for people that seek safety and protection at our borders. The pact emphasizes the principle of non-refoulement, but at the same time it introduces measures that are meant to complicate and reduce the possibility for seeking and obtaining asylum in EU. So we see, you can say, popularly put, that protecting borders are prioritized above and beyond protecting people that seek safety. With the pact, we fear that we'll see an increased use of border procedures, accelerated procedures, as well as an extensive use of detention, including detention of children. And we will also potentially see an expanded use of admissibility procedures with the aim of immediately refusing of entry of and shifting of protection responsibility to third countries. And we are also afraid that we will see limited access to effective remedies, which will reduce safeguards in the procedures for asylum. And then we also see that we have a pact that includes provisions for derogation as part of the crisis and force majeure regulation, as Tineke was also mentioning here, allowing for substandard and less rigorous procedures in a number of not yet and very ill-defined situations in the pact. In combination, these measures are likely to limit access to asylum procedures and lead to lack of adequate safeguards in the procedures and thereby an increased risk of refoulement. Secondly, we also see that there's a risk that this pact will contribute to detrimental human rights effects for refugees and migrants in third countries. We see an increased third country cooperation on asylum and migration. This is not per se a bad thing. This could be a good thing. It's an integral part of the EU pact, but it actually tends to promote a securitized approach to migration and border management that actually has the consequence of restricting access, strengthen border controls, and criminalizing mobility. And the way the EU third country arrangements have been made out is actually not very conducive because they are informal, they are not binding in nature, and that actually impedes democratic and judicial control of these arrangements and makes it difficult to secure accountability for violations of international and European law. These agreements obviously also entail the possibility of supporting asylum systems in third countries, upgrading asylum systems, up-qualifying asylum systems. That is a very good thing because we need good asylum systems, not only in Europe but also in third countries. But the risk here is that we see that a number of third countries, and this is based on evidence, are not interested in receiving that part of the cooperation because they know that the moment they have accepted upgrading of their asylum system, they will be declared as safe third countries. So we need, if we want to really strengthen the capacity of asylum systems in third countries, we must allow these countries not to be immediately determined as safe countries because they will need time to sort of upgrade their own asylum capacity, because we need to bear in mind this is for the protection of asylum seekers. It's not for leaving asylum seekers out, neither of Europe or these third countries. So a good way of going about that would be actually to say, when we upgrade capacity in asylum systems in third countries, these countries will not be declared safe third countries in the first 5 to 7 years, but actually have the time to strengthen their capacity. So some risks associated with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So now we're actually going back to Greece with Christina Psara from MSF. Please, Christina.
Yes, I'll try to sit because I don't want people to see my back from this way. Thank you very much for the invitation. I can speak for hours, but I will try to be brief.
5 minutes.
Yes. So my name is Christina Psara. I'm the General Director for MSF in Greece, Doctors Without Borders, a medical humanitarian organization. I'll speak a bit about Greece, but allow me to speak a bit broader on our operations in Europe. We have operations in 12 countries in Europe or in places affected by EU migration policies. So the United Kingdom, Belgium, Italy, France, Greece, Libya, Poland, and many other places. I will not surprise you. What we see in our operations is the human cost of migration policies. What we see increasingly all these years, and we've been calling for a change, is people trapped because of deals with aiming to externalization of the European borders, so trapped in places like Niger, Tunisia, Libya, Serbia, and many other places. We see people blocked, that may be denied humanitarian assistance. We see them denied safety and dignity, and we see them detained. Detention is the de facto welcoming policy. To be a bit more precise, from August 21 until September 23, we have assisted 28,000 people in the European borders. Most of them have been injured or harmed due to border walls, pushbacks, absence of search and rescue. At the same time, we have responded to survivors of 12 shipwrecks in Greece and in Italy. Supposedly 875 people have lost their lives or gone missing in these shipwrecks under, of course, different conditions that have led to the loss of their lives. Also in November 23, we published a report. It's called In Plain Sight. It's the human cost of migration policies. You may have it in your mailboxes. This is a report that builds on evidence of 2.5 years, aggregated medical data, testimonies of our patients that have been exposed, according to them, to tremendous levels of violence. So the stories are different. They speak, we have people that have been hiding in the bushes, in the woods for days without water or food, trying to avoid pushbacks according to them, but also because they are afraid of their lives. People that have been exhausted, suffering from hypothermia, exposed to several weather conditions. That's not only the situation in Greece. I was in France a couple of weeks ago where we ran projects in Calais. Calais is there for years. No migration policy has managed to change it. We do work with unaccompanied minors. It's just that the last couple of years, the age of the minors has gone down. So these are the changes. Also, if we speak about people who survive the journey and they manage to make it in Europe, what they face is detention. And the detention facilities are not that great always. Yes, we don't have Moria, which was anyway a factory of death and despair, but still we have close controlled camps. Still, I'm sorry to say, Samos runs over capacity. Yes, with good intention, and all people are trying to do their best. And yes, we seek shared responsibility, but still we speak about a place that has 4,000 people approximately now, no permanent doctor, days or weeks with no running water. Similar situation in Lesbos, 6,000 people. And even though we speak about the physical traumas, there are traumas that are hidden. The mental health conditions, what children are experiencing. The groups that I referred earlier are including groups of children, elderly people, and also women in the very late stages of their pregnancy. We had women delivering in plain sight as well in many, many places. So what we've been advocating, and what we've been advocating for years now, it's not something new, it's not something that started in 2020 or it's linked with any political agendas. We've been advocating for a change of the narrative and a change in the strategy, because what has been advertised many, many times in the past as solutions or as a system that will improve the situation, it's not the case. And it's important to imagine, it's important to keep an eye, and thank you for bringing it up. You spoke about Sudan very rightly. 600,000 people have crossed in Chad. In Zamzam camp, one child dies every 2 hours. So while we are speaking of a few thousand refugees, other countries are massively hosting people. And when Europe showed what can be done with the Ukrainian crisis as well. So let's keep that in mind. And I'm not asking you a question here, it's more of a statement and another call once again to try to take a different shift in all EU migration policies.
Thank you so much, Cristina. Now, our last discussant, Sergio Carrera from CEPS. Please, Sergio.
Thank you very much. So how to read the so-called pact in light of the European Commission that we've had these past years, the van der Leyen Commission. And we've studied the current structures of the Commission to better understand the policy outputs. So we saw how von der Leyen divided two vice presidents, one on so-called protecting or promoting European way of life, which is rather controversial, still nowadays, and another one on EU values. Now, Vice President Skinas on promoting European way of life has coordinated and supervised DG Home, which is Commissioner Johansson in charge of migration, and we have a separate Vice President, Jourova, who has supervised DG Justice, Commissioner Reinders. Now, why is this important? This was a big change in comparison to the Juncker Commission, the previous commission, where both DG Home and DG Justice were coordinated and supervised by a Vice President in charge of EU values. So migration policies were under the radar, supervision and coordination of a Vice President in charge of fundamental rights, rule of law, and better regulation. Now, how does this new structuring of the Commission, how has this worked out? It has translated into three main elements I want to highlight. And some of them have been mentioned before. First, a lack of enforcement of existing EU law, but not only that, of EU values, the rule of law, fundamental rights, in the scope of migration policies. Secondly, it has not been about substance. And it was mentioned before, politics have played a considerable role behind the pact. It has not been based on evidence. And third, I will develop on what we call reverse intergovernmentalism, in an area where the EU has gained legal competence over the years and has really established as a key actor with competence in questions of asylum and migration. Now, the first point on lack of enforcement. Our research has showed a way in which this new commission has somehow an illusion that by enacting new law, EU member states are going to comply with it. And we have a big question mark, indeed, as to the extent to which this is going to be the case. The new pact introduces a number of derogations, exceptions. It has been mentioned, the crisis regulation is all about that. It's about exceptionalism becoming law. For the first time, we have a new instrument codifying crisis and allowing member states to implement and enact massive exceptions to core rules that exist at the moment. Now, the argument has been made that the pact is been running the risk of ad hoc legalization of current practices which in fact are illegal as we speak, So using law to codify illegal practices. And this, of course, gives a sense of impunity by member states, that anything goes, that there are blurred lines, that there are nebulous possibilities, ambiguities on what to do, when, how, and this leads to enormous legal uncertainty. The second point is not about substance and evidence. We've done so many studies for the European Parliament, independent studies, independent research, showing how the pact, in fact, did not come with an impact assessment. It was not based on any independent evidence showing its need, its value added, how the impacts were going to be translated into practice. This includes the crisis proposal, the revision of not only the pact, by the way. This has been across all the main legislative files in this European Commission. It's been systematic disregard of the better regulation principles and toolbox. None of the key legal instruments, new proposals by this Commission, DG Home and President Skinas, Vice President Skinas behind it, have come along with a proper assessment about their need. We had the instrumentalization proposal, no impact assessment. The proposal revising the visa code, suspension mechanism of visa, no impact assessment. The pact, no impact assessment. The pact, in fact, came with a working document. I'm still trying to figure out what a working document is. Well, the fact is that that working document was based on false premises. It's based on lies. One of those lies is that the assumption seems to be that a majority of people arriving at the EU external borders are false asylum seekers, that they are lying, that they are cheaters. This is false. When one looks at the statistics of Eurostat, it's very clear that a majority of people still reaching EU external borders are legitimately looking for international protection. So those people cannot be expelled. Obviously, this will run against the very essence of having a right to asylum and human dignity. Upholding human dignity that every person is entitled to, or should be. Now, the pact is fraught with nebulous concepts, but also, I mean, the level of complexity is beyond the roof. I mean, for people with legal background, I need a cup of tea, some, Belgian chocolate to understand what is going on. Now, if that's the case for me, I only wonder for anybody to really properly understand what is going on. Now, who gains with this? My real question also for governments, and I'm very sympathetic of how difficult it is, but is this really helping? Is this really going to help national authorities, those at the borders, even representatives of governments holding the EU external border, the focus on containment, on border procedures, on pre-entry? Is this really going to help those countries? Our research has raised very big question marks. We've done interviews in Brussels with several permanent representations, and there are mixed views on this. Are we really looking at sharing of responsibility? And the last point is reversed intergovernmentalism. It was mentioned by Jean-Louis. I mean, the first thing that this new commission did was socializing, sending Vice President Skinas and Commissioner Johansson to meet all member states and to come up with a shopping list of wish of those ministries of interior. And this led to a very intergovernmental output, which it is surprising, again, because the Lisbon Treaty tells us a completely different story. Completely different story where the EU has competence in this area, and ministries of interior have already granted competence to the EU to do this. And one last point. We have a European Commission president that is not democratically elected, going into concluding a memorandum of understanding with Tunisia, with a prime minister of a government, Italy, that represents the extreme right in Europe, supporting a far-right government approach to migration, twice. On the memorandum of understanding of Tunisia, on the Africa summit, a memorandum of understanding between Italy and Albania, the Commission saying is legal. What is at stake here? If there is such a concern of the extreme right, let's not play that game, particularly the European Commission highest levels, saying, it's somehow good. Of course, we don't go with Eurosceptics, but what about far right that are playing European politics, but do want to transform the very essence of the European Union? And by this, I brought back the values. Very clear, those values are not about ideology. It's Article 2 of the treaty, of the treaties. There is one MEP who always says the Article 1 is hello, Article 2 is what we are. A community of values. Why are those values disconnected from migration policy? Why is this policy different? Is it different? I've challenged that. And in fact, my main call will be for the new commission to bring back migration into a rule of law, monitoring an angle, and fundamental rights angle, and furthermore, not leave people behind. Because let's be honest, this pact is forgetting the people who are going to be targeted by it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergio. Okay, now I'm sure you will have a lot to say to what was said by the discussants, so please, maybe like 2 minutes each, max, if you can keep it short. Thank you.
Now, the 2 minutes is an impossible condition, as you realize, and I really welcome the debate and the exchange of views, and I find it very refreshing and very important for policymakers to listen to all this. I agree with most of what was said. I disagree with some, strongly disagree with some, and I will say this. We can discuss about the legal conformity and the values and everything, but we should, and I welcome this kind of discussion, but we should acknowledge the big elephants in the room. For example, UNHCR. Now, 1/3 of UNHCR budget comes from the United States. Already this is in peril in the US Congress. If the election result in November goes a certain way, UNHCR will be facing bankruptcy. And if similar election results happen in Europe, the way they happened in the Netherlands recently, to speak of the Dutch, UNHCR will have even more difficulty, not about the legalities here and there, but about its very existence. So I feel that we don't acknowledge the peril the convention is in. And we all see our little thing. We policymakers don't have this luxury. We have to be aware of the bigger picture if we are to be effective. Now, the big thing, the big story that nobody mentioned is the fact that in Europe we do no returns. There are no returns. Only 1% of the returnable return. If this number goes up to 90, then we can discuss. But right now we are faced with a big failure. And it's false. It's fake news that every asylum seeker gets asylum. The success rate right now in Europe is close to 50%. 50% of asylum applications succeed, 50% fail. Those who fail, if we are to have a credible system that gets the support of our people, need to be returned. Right. It is false to say that asylum seekers are detained. They are not detained, and they do not live in closed control reception centers. I strongly disagree with this statement. They live in open reception center. Everybody comes in and out, including the Médecins Sans Frontières. Many of them are employed and they have full access to the labor market in Greece after the first 60 days in Greece. So let's not create impressions that do not stand. It is false to say that the European asylum system does not process the applications fast enough. It does. In Greece, the rate is a few weeks in a very credible way, because we know from the judicial review later on that 99% of the administrative decisions stand the scrutiny of the judiciary. In America, where the system does not work, it takes up to 8 years for asylum applications to be processed. So let's recognize our strength if we are to speak sincerely about our weaknesses. Now, okay. I mean, one final point. It is a compromise. And obviously it's an imperfect compromise. It's a compromise basically between Meloni on the right and Scholz on the left. It was the German Greens all the way to the Italian Conservatives who agreed on the pact. The extremes on both left and right, from Kaczynski and Orban in the Conservatives and the far right on the one side, the left and half of the Greens on the other side, are against it and will do everything possible to defeat it. Obviously, we can talk about, and I think they are cooperating, and one is feeding the other. Not directly and not willingly, I say politically, at the end of the day. With the help of many, let's not be naive, of outside forces who want it, who want the migration to be instrumentalized inside Europe for the destruction of the European idea. Migration is a very difficult subject, very toxic, very polarizing. It can explode Europe if it is not managed properly. So I do not recognize to anybody the monopoly on humanitarianism. Anybody. Nobody is more humanitarian. I do not sleep at night because we have an impossible situation to deal with and to provide for these people and to save lives in seas, and we do it every day. So before claiming the high ground, anybody who is trying to claim the high grounds, where it can get very cold, let's be sincere. We are humanitarian and we are European. We are not naive. Europe has borders, The idea that Europe has no borders, the idea that any kind of guarding of borders is illegitimate and goes against human rights, the way that it is being said time and again in Libe, for example, in the European Parliament, defeats the purpose and only feeds on the far right and the Trump kind of politicians, the way we saw that in the Netherlands, in this liberal bastion of the founding member of the European Union recently. So let's be sincere and politically astute, because we have a very big fight ahead of us against these big, big elephants in the room that should never be ignored. Thank you, and I hope next time we have fewer speakers and more time to be able to have a more kind of a discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And I agree with you about the first entry problem.
Yeah.
And I hope you succeeded in your battle in the Netherlands to convince the Dutch, because it's not, a politician is not judged by the ideas. A politician is judged by the political success. So I give you all the support necessary to convince the Dutch to get away from this first entry that gives impossible burden on frontline states, and to move on a more solidarity kind of a system. And I wish you every success.
Thank you so much. Okay, now.
I hope that didn't reduce my speaking time.
Yeah, no. You have 2 minutes, yeah.
No, actually, the one thing I agree with is that politicians, but I think that many people do, is looking at the broader picture. And I think that many of the discussions already did. And I think I find that very important, because this is what we need to do. We need to go beyond our borders or specific EU interests to see what is at stake. And indeed, I mean, Charlotte already said it all. I mean, the number of refugees is going up. The vast majority is in the poor, fragile countries. And with our shifting out policies, we are actually copying, or we ask them even, or incentivize them to copy these kind of externalizations, specifically with the transit countries that we see now, Tunisia, Algeria, Egypt, etc. Instead of helping them, supporting them in hosting refugees, we actually sort of undermine the duty that most of these countries still feel. I think we really should look at that broad picture and prioritize this common responsibility, because not because of moral high ground or whatever, but because we have this responsibility, all of them. We have this UN Global Compact on the refugees, we have the Refugee Convention, and also practically, I mean, don't think that we will get anywhere with simply shifting out and looking away. No, it doesn't work. I mean, deals with autocrats, which leads to more repression, leads only to more smuggling, to more people wanting to try to depart that country. And so we need to have a more comprehensive view. How can we support refugees wherever they are on the world? Why don't we have a refugee fund, let's say, where the strongest countries contribute more, and then make sure there is more predictable funding everywhere, more sustainable funding in exchange for increasing rights for refugees wherever they are. And this is a completely change of the narrative that we have now. And just for another elephant in the room that you mentioned, the far right, and you mentioned the Dutch example. Let me see what is happening there. It's the conservative liberals that opened up the door for far right. It was not left wing or whatever. No, they are not in power for a long time anymore. So it's not these who are to blame, but the copying behavior and language of conservative middle parties that they copied from the far right has actually opened up the door. Because why choose for this copy behavior if you can also choose for the real extreme right? And we are, by enrolling their agenda, we are normalizing them, we are empowering them. So let's indeed return, as Sergio said, to a rights and value-based approach, meaning common responsibility and access to asylum and protection, instead of only being obsessed with access, with protection of borders. Although no one, I really hear, no one ever advocate in the Libe Committee for open borders. I mean, this is also a kind of fake news that I think we should all take our responsibility. It's about diverging narratives, perhaps, or views, but it's not about you know, making a joke or ridiculizing the different narratives.
Thank you. Tamas, please.
Thanks a lot. Apologies for boring you anew, since I need to stay within the confines of the Fundamental Rights Agency mandate, and I think I'm just not allowed to, and mandated to address many of the points that have been put out there. Just a few points, and I'll try to stick to the 2 minutes. It was mentioned, of course, that the pact instrument's main goal is to strengthen and increase the protection of borders. We see it that way, that this is the zeitgeist these days. But these increased protection of borders should not, of course, go to detriment of protecting the people, because of the many arguments that have been put out based on EU values and just the fundamental rights framework, which is, of course, independent from the political views. And another, I think a discussant, Charlotte, mentioned the risk of limited access to remedies. This is something that I also would like to highlight on behalf of the agency, that we see, again, it's too early to have an in-depth assessment. We are just tapping this new elephant, to use this word elephant in a different context. We are tapping this new elephant called the pact at the beginning of the exercise. We are not there yet, but we have started discussions. And there's risk of curtailed remedies and the suspensive effect of different kind of judicial reviews. And of course, lawyers need to keep an eye on that. And more broadly, I mean, we as the agency have documented and seen and observed serious, persistent fundamental rights violations at land borders or sea borders and external borders of the EU, including the lack of access to remedies, including the lack of access to justice in general, and the absence of official investigations into rights violations. So everything of that nature can also be framed as a rule of law issue. If there are zones, like lawless zones within the EU territory, be them like border regions, then of course this just go at variance with the basic foundational values and legal principles of the EU legal order. And finally, yeah, I think Sergio mentioned that all these sets of instruments is very complex and hard to understand, and how it can help on the ground to practitioners who will be actually mandated and assigned with the implementation. Yes, this is one of the practice-driven big questions, and in this regard, of course, I can't reinvent the wheel. We need more guidance, we need more training, we just need more empowerment of the authorities on the ground, and the Fundamental Rights Agency will do its utmost to support that process. Thank you.
Please.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm not bound by any kind of remit or mandate, so I can be a bit provocative. I will start with you, Sergio. You start by questioning the absence of any impact assessment. But in a way, you provided the answer, and you got the answer in the first reaction of my co-panelist colleagues. It's all about politics, guy. We don't need impact assessment. We don't need impact assessment. This is an area where the negotiation between member states is essentially transactional. There is absolutely no common good or idea of a common good there. I always remember a conversation that I had with one of my former boss, because I was also in the humanitarian world, who was Kristalina Georgieva. We were in New York for the Ministerial Week, and we were commenting on the then negotiation of the Global Compact on Migration. And she said me very clearly, she's an environmentalist by background, very few people know that. And she said to me, they will never make it. Why? Because there is no idea of a common good. When it is about climate change, when it is about the digital agenda, there is a clear understanding of what a common good can be, not in this area. So I have, after having been for so many years in this field, I have the feeling now that we are reaching the limit. We are at the edge of it. Can a disagreement on migration break down the EU? Yes, or at least that part of the policy area. I'm absolutely convinced about that. There is a very serious risk there. first thing. Second thing, again, following on what you said, values. When you look at the broad picture, we need to go global. What is now at stake at the EU? What does the concept of strategic autonomy means? It means we have now to start thinking in terms of interests, not in terms of values when it comes with our relation with the rest of the world. It's all over the place. It's about geopolitics, it's about geoeconomics. And I think that we should start beginning reflecting about the geopolitics and the geoeconomics of migration, also when it comes to legal pathway and legal migration. Because there are a lot of good things which are now being launched. I would quote the Mattei plan in Italy. I would quote the global gateway at EU level, which translates into a very simple statement: skills need to be there. They stay to be there, and we should stop poaching their skills to compensate for our labor shortages or demographic deficit. By the way, demography, by 2015, the population of the EU as it stands today will be less than 4% of the world population. Less than 4%. It will happen. Last but not least, changing the narrative. I've heard that for so many times. I would say we are now less than 100 days before the European election. And, Mr. Minister, we'll need badly leadership during those 100 days. Because if there is no leadership, one could end up, I don't wish it, I'm not a doomsday person, with a situation where we have in the European Parliament a slightly different political landscape. And where, indeed, those sitting there, when they have in front of them the designated president of the Commission, and the designated commissioner, whoever they are going to be in charge of migration in whatever setting, that they don't tell them, you know, your pact, we don't like that at all. It's not what we needed. We need something different, and we're going to tell you what we need. We should avoid that.
Perfect, thank you so much. We're over time, but if there's a couple of statements from discussants or the audience as well. Okay. Yeah,
just to immediately, very briefly, to respond a little bit. I mean, I agree to a certain extent with Jean-Louis. However, I thought that our common good is Article 2 of the Treaty on European Union, meaning adhering as a community of values, community of law, to work together. And if that is not there, everything is ended. Everything finishes. We talk about trust, mutual trust. Why is asylum policy different? Meaning, why do we allow states of exception, places of exception, and so forth? The Commission, I agree, of course, there is politics playing ahead, but the Commission is responsible to enforce EU law. It has that mandate in the treaties, is the guarantor of the treaties, and this is precisely a key issue of rule of law at EU level as well. When the Commission does not do its job properly, what happens? It fires back to the legitimacy of the European Union in itself. And yet again, I think this is something to look at more for us to understand. Why is it that migration and asylum is different in some minds to other policies where EU values are so much insisting as the glue for working together in a union?
Do you wanna reply quickly? Very okay. Yeah. Do you? Do the other discussants have any burning question or statement? Otherwise, I'll open it up to the public. Yeah.
Thank you so much to all the panelists and discussants. I'm Andrew Flown with the University of Cambridge and the Center for European Policy Studies. I spent the last 7 months completing fieldwork in refugee shelters in Mexico, often observing the effects of the digitalization of the American border with Mexico, and also during this time and in conversations with the US State Department representatives, observing a European interest in exploring a similar digitalization of asylum processing. I'd be interested to know what the panelists think about the future of the digitalization of asylum processing in Europe, and if it's possible that that digitalization would not also concurrently involve the externalization of asylum processing. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody wants to quickly reply? Yeah, I don't know. We can take another one maximum, I would say. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Donato Sozemoya, one of the CEP's young thinkers. I just wanted to ask, we've actually discussed a lot about the issues of a new migration pact. And even before the initiation of this pact, I've read, because I'm a student of migration, severally that one of the major challenges to this migration issue in the EU is fundamental human rights perspective, like the researcher said. So I want to know, was there a different approach to the mainstreaming of human rights dimension with the new migration pact? Like, was there a point of departure, like a special consideration to the issue of human rights during the initiation of this new migration pact? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, very short answers, please. Well, the defenders of the pact, including Ylva Johansson, a Swedish social democrat, need to be mentioned, a Swedish social democrat, Ylva Johansson, says that it standardizes and homogenizes the protection of human rights, so it improves the respect for human rights in the European space. Now, externalization, which is an issue, and by the way, started with the 2016 EU-Turkey agreement that was signed by all EU leaders, including our Spanish friends. No, the parliament well, I didn't. I speak of the government, the Podemos government, which did not oppose the fences that Spain continues to have, the first fences ever in Morocco. The Podemos, not the right, the Podemos. It's important to remember, because here we are competing who is the nice guy, and because I have suffered a lot by the far right in my own country, I do not grant this privilege to anybody. So, externalization happens precisely because of our failure in returns. There is this big fear in Europe among politicians, political system. Everybody who comes to Europe stays in Europe no matter what. So it's better to keep asylum processing as far away as possible. Politicians say big words, then because Europe, despite all the impressions to the contrary, continues to be the paramount rule of law region in the world with the most respect for human rights and the strictest rules and regulations and the most independent judicial system, no matter what politicians say, like Mr. Sunak and Suella Cruella Beaverman in England, or Meloni, or whoever else, at the end of the day, we continue to have 99% of the returnables not returned. So this is the real problem. Now, digitalization, and I finish, we are always behind the smugglers. Smugglers and criminal networks are so far ahead of us. We are in the analog age where they are in the digital age. 3+ million people crossed irregularly the United States last year. They were not Latin Americans only, they were Chinese, Africans. The smuggling networks are global. I was really impressed by one number, 50,000 Turks crossed into the United States from Mexico in only 1 year, which shows you that if the border in Mexico is sealed, I don't know, President Trump has even, candidate Trump has even threatened to use nuclear weapons, just to give you the elephant in the room and what we are dealing about right now, because we are in a totally different age and era. They can shift easily into Iberia and the rest of Europe. So we need to be alert. We need to do our humanitarian duty. We need to recognize that most of the refugees are in third world countries and in poor nations that cannot provide, but we also need to manage effectively and not to allow space for the extremists on the one side to dominate the debate the same way they did in the Netherlands. So I wish you next time to be more successful in your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. Stina Gestrik, please. Yeah.
Maybe briefly. Maybe if you again refer to the Dutch, I mean, who are those in the Netherlands who are really reluctant to share responsibility? These are the right-wing parties. This is not the progressive policies who are the most reaching out in order to increase the solidarity. But, Charles, I share a lot of your analysis, but on the one hand, I hear this so many times now, let's vote for now, let's compromise, because after the elections it will get worse. I think we should not stop our thinking because of a possible outcome afterwards. It still needs to be important that whatever we vote for is in line with our values and the treaties, but also if it will work. And this is also, we didn't discuss a lot about this, but will this pact work? Will it do what we think it should do? And maybe for you, it's reduction of irregular migration or better returns. For others, it's more solidarity, etc. I think on all these points, we can be quite skeptic about what will happen with the pact. And then, okay, you can say, finally we managed, we have something, but if that something is actually, leaves us with empty hands, do we really definitely need to support that? So I think we need to keep on thinking. Your question about was human rights, the principle, I think that really depends a little bit on the actor that you're asking, actually, to be honest, because so many interests were on the same table that, of course, human rights were there for certain actors, but for others, other interests were there. One of them is, how do we keep the far right from entering into power? And you can discuss if that's the big, the right strategy. Your question on digitalization, I mean, that's a technique, right? So it really depends how you're going to use that. I think if you use it for enhancing legal pathways for resettlement, it can work, it could work very well, because I think this is something that we still fall short of. Ask UNHCR, the numbers are very low. But if it would mean that it facilitates denying entrance, then we have another problem, of course. Then it adds to the problem we already have now at our external border.
Thanks a lot. Tamas, should we, please, last point?
Thanks a lot. I'll start with the digitalization of asylum policies. I mean, looking at the pact again from this boring technical legal perspective, I can't see anything groundbreaking or new in this regard. Nevertheless, if we read together the pact instruments with the newly adopted EU AI Act, which lists some of those applications that can be also used in the asylum process, like, I don't know, dialect recognition, any kinds of other AI-driven tools to have decision-making as a high-risk AI application, which is, of course, then possible, subject to safeguards, then perhaps member states in near future will make use of that option of, all right, we have now, legally speaking, a leeway, and then they will insert and or put into operation new technicalities. And these can create, of course, those risks mentioned briefly by Tineke. On the other hand, if we look at digitalization in a more broader perspective, there are, of course, proceedings prior to the asylum process that are fully digitalized, will be largely digitalized in future, like the screening process with all the use of large-scale IT systems, with the use of not just SIS, but EES, ETIAS watchlist, and the list goes on. So, and these can also be used as tools of exclusion and the function creep I just mentioned. So if we put it's into a larger continuum, people arriving at the borders must go through first screening and other procedures before channeled into the asylum, and all those procedures will be subject to heavy digitalization. Then, of course, it boils down to risks of the negative side effects of digitalization when these people will end up in the asylum process. And when it comes to the fundamental considerations during negotiations of the pact, I mean, we were not at the table, so I would skip that question. It's rather a question of how you see it. There are, of course, safeguards that I also wanted to point out and make it clear. It's a question whether you see it half full or half empty if you compare it to a glass of water. It's really just your point of view. Thanks.
Please.
Okay, 2-3 things to follow up. My plea was not to stop thinking because of the fear of the outcome of the election. I was going to say, okay, we are in one of the regions of the world where we still enjoy free and fair elections. And we are even becoming better at identifying Russian disinformation. Okay, so that means that we have now less than 100 days where indeed people must stand up and indeed defend about migrants a different narrative, that the one that we would not like to hear. It's now the time to do it. It's not, and not backtrack because, well, you know that your electorate might dislike what you would say, you don't like what the others are saying, but you will not contradict them because contradicting them would maybe, undermine your electoral position. But that's when it comes to that now, here and now, during the next 100 days, less than 100 days. Values and interest. My comment was not that much about the internal negotiation, it was about the overall of the EU external relation which is taking place now. Yeah, but I will come back to the consistency. What I see now, and again, it's all over the board, all across the board, there is a keen awareness, and Ukraine was the electroshock, that we are back into power politics. That an essentially value-based external relation policy, that like it was the case, will not pay off. And that we now have to start thinking in our own interest. Not that we completely forget about values. I mean, you can different. No, yeah. No, okay, but
the treaties really say that the EU abroad must comply with EU values.
Absolutely. I'm not saying that the EU is not complying with the EU values. I'm not saying that the balance is shifting and that people are now more and more of the view that we must think in terms of interest, but that we can defend our interest in a principled way, which is not mission impossible at all. I'm not convinced that there is a clear distinction between value and interest. The two can cope together. Now, what about the internal dimension? My answer would be yours. The only thing that we can say, you can state, and you state it yourself, that the answer to your question is that was the negotiation of the pact exclusively guided by values-related concern? What we've heard this morning, and I take your point, Mr. Minister, about, okay, there were safeguards and all that. What we've heard this morning is that, no, there were other concerns during the negotiation than simply values. The balance will have to be done, as I said in my previous intervention, maybe not today on the basis of the text as they stand, but within 2 years from now, the way they are going to be implemented.
Okay, we'll run, okay, one phrase, yes.
Just to take some credit, the politicians, I totally agree with your statements. And I think now it's the time to give the good fight. We in Greece did two things symbolically very big and substantively, but symbolically as well. A, we provided documents to undocumented migrants. This gives a message to everybody, and we did it with 262 votes in parliament. All the opposition voted with us, except for the far right. And recently, we legalized gay marriage. We are the first Christian Orthodox country in Europe to do so, the first east of Vienna to do so, to send a powerful message, not to wait after the Euro elections, which we were being advised by many, wait, it's not the time, the far right is on the ascendancy, to do it now and to give the political fight now. Thank you very much.
Just to agree with you before we close, because I think it's very important what you just said, that there are other policy options, which is not expulsion. What you just mentioned is regularization as an effective and success policy. You just said it. And I think this is really important to get out of our thinking that expulsions at all costs is success and the most effective policy. In some situations, it's not.
In order to have legal migration and to have the Greek people and the European people accept migration as a fact of life and need it for society, you have to support the security and that the societies are secure. Nothing destroys more the illegal migration.
Maybe my famous last words
the
then,
disorder in the border.
get
word,
back
yeah.
to work on returns, because I hear a lot, there are so many hurdles, it's the laws are impeding or whatever. This is not the case. We can have a proper and effective return procedure within our legal framework.
That's great.
But let's not forget about protection.
That's clear. On this note, thank you so much everyone for staying over time. You can join us for lunch downstairs. Lunch is provided. It was a pleasure to see you all. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck. Thank you. It was great seeing you.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you. It was very nice. Thank you. It was great seeing
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
When we meet next year, we will be talking about the competition for attracting migrants into Europe.
Yeah, exactly.
So we are already the far right.
Yeah.
That one, even the far right. So.